Nathan Lane just destroyed Hollywood's biggest stars, and nobody saw it coming. There is a particular kind of satisfaction that the entertainment industry rarely delivers cleanly. Most takedowns in Hollywood are passive-aggressive non-answers. A vague statement from a publicist, a loaded comment in a magazine that everyone reads and nobody says out loud. And then occasionally, somebody sits down on a daytime television programme and says exactly what they mean, without breaks, without a handler whispering in their earpiece, and the whole room just stops. That is what happened this week when Nathan Lane walked onto The View and, within about 90 seconds of sitting down, called Timothée Chalamet a schmuck on national television. And then spent the next several minutes making absolutely sure everyone understood why. This is not simply the story of one actor insulting another. That would be gossip, and gossip we can find anywhere. This is a story about something considerably more interesting. What it means when a man who has spent 44 years building himself on Broadway has to watch a 30-year-old movie star casually dismiss the foundations of everything he has ever done. And then what happens when that man is given 4 minutes and a live audience to respond? Nathan Lane did not just land a burn, he delivered a verdict. And what that verdict reveals about the current state of Hollywood, about who gets to define what art matters and what art doesn't, and about the specific blindness that can come with being very famous, very young. That is what we are going to spend the next 20 minutes on. We need to start with what Chalamet actually said, because context has been buried under the pile-on and several important details have gone missing. On the 21st of February, Chalamet sat down with Matthew McConaughey at the University of Texas at Austin for a town hall co-hosted by Variety and CNN. The conversation was ostensibly about the future of cinema. Chalamet, who is nominated for Best Actor at this weekend's Academy Awards for his performance in Marty Supreme, a film about a ping-pong player, more on that later, was making a point about theatrical movie-going. He said he admired people who championed the cinema experience, but also believed that if something was genuinely great, audiences would find it regardless. Barbie and Oppenheimer, he argued, proved that. And then he made his pivot. He said he did not want to be in the position of advocating for an art form the way some people do for ballet and opera, where the message is effectively, keep this thing alive, even though no one cares about it anymore. He added, immediately, that he had all respect for ballet and opera people and joked that he had just lost 14 cents in viewership. The clip was recorded on the 21st of February. It did not circulate widely until the 5th of March, the very day that Oscar voting closed. Think about the timing of that for a moment. The single piece of footage most damaging to Chalamet's awards campaign surfaced at the precise moment when votes could no longer be changed. Whether that timing was deliberate is a question worth sitting with. But here is what is not in question. The moment it dropped, the response from the performing arts world was unlike anything you typically see from institutions not known for going viral. The Metropolitan Opera posted a video montage of its production process directed at Chalamet by name. The Royal Ballet and Opera in London noted that thousands of people fill their house every single night and told him their doors were open if he wished to reconsider. The English National Opera offered him free tickets. Opera North announced, rather pointedly, that it had sold 45,000 tickets that season so far. The Seattle Opera, which demonstrated the best marketing instincts of the entire lot, launched a discount code, Timothy, giving 14% off seats to their production of Carmen, matching the 14 cents he had joked about. Doja Cat made and then deleted a TikTok attacking him, and then issued a second video admitting she had never actually been to an opera or a ballet and had simply wanted, in her own words, a hug. The New York City Ballet principal dancers Megan Fairchild and Sarah Mearns issued direct responses. Fairchild's was particularly pointed. She challenged the idea that Chalamet had simply chosen acting over dance because it was more commercially viable, noting she had not realised he was a world-class dancer who had simply opted out. Andrea Bocelli, who has sold north of 90 million records and is one of the most recognised voices in the classical world, told People magazine that he was surprised by the comments and that opera and ballet draw from the same source of human emotion as filmmaking. He invited Chalamet to a concert. Misty Copeland, the first black female principal dancer at American Ballet Theatre, observed that it was very interesting that Chalamet had invited her to help promote Marty Supreme, given his apparent views on the world she represents. And here, before we even get to Nathan Lane, is the detail that most of the coverage has either missed or treated as a footnote when it deserves to be the headline. Timothée Chalamet's mother, Nicole Flender, danced as a child with the New York City Ballet. She attended Yale University on a dance scholarship. She later taught dance in New York public schools. His sister Pauline Chalamet trained at the School of American Ballet. His grandmother danced with the New York City Ballet. Chalamet himself has described, in multiple past interviews, growing up backstage at the David H. Koch Theatre at Lincoln Center. He once said, "My grandmother danced in the New York City Ballet. My mother danced in the New York City Ballet. My sister danced in the New York City Ballet. I grew up dreaming big backstage at the Koch Theatre." He called himself a Venn diagram of the best cultural influences of the 21st and 20th century. This is not a man who didn't know better. This is a man who knew exactly how deep those roots went, reached for a casual analogy to make a point about streaming and attention spans, and grabbed a live wire instead. Even during the Marty Supreme press tour, his team had leaned on ballet connections for marketing. Misty Copeland had been brought in as part of the film's Dream Big campaign, wearing the iconic Marty Supreme jacket, her name and image deployed to lend a production a certain cultural credibility. The irony is clean enough to sting. None of this had fully coalesced into a single cultural moment until Nathan Lane sat down at The View. Whoopi Goldberg introduced the topic, and Lane did not take a breath before he started. "Oh, what a schmuck," he said. Joy Behar immediately moved to give Chalamet cover. He opened his mouth, "Poor guy, leave him alone." And Lane replied with a patience that suggested he had been thinking about this, that this was not a spontaneous combustion, but something that had been building into a fully formed argument since he first saw the clip. He acknowledged that one does not really want to give something this more attention than it deserves. And then he gave it considerably more attention than it deserves, and it was worth every second. He called the comments kaleidoscopic in its stupidity and insensitivity. That phrase is doing a specific kind of work. Kaleidoscopic does not mean large or simple. It means multidirectional. Stupidity that fractures and scatters and manages to look foolish from every angle simultaneously. Then he turned to McConaughey. He asked who had decided that a town hall between these two men was a necessary meeting of minds, and why no one had instead convened a meeting of Democrats to work out how to remove what he called this lunatic from the White House. Having landed that political grenade, he pivoted straight back to Chalamet. He said he had realised Chalamet was still promoting Marty Supreme. that endless ping-pong movie. And then he delivered the line that the internet has been repeating ever since. If Chalamet thinks no one cares about opera and ballet, Lane had news for him about how much the world cares about ping-pong. The audience reaction was immediate. Lane received the kind of applause that feels less like approval and more like relief. The particular sound of a crowd that has been waiting for someone to say something clearly. His final verdict on the whole event was that he suspected some cannabis had been consumed before the town hall, and that this was possibly a case of terribly unfunny people trying to be funny, which always ends in disaster. Now let's place Nathan Lane properly in this story, because he has been described variously as a Broadway legend and a Hollywood veteran. And both are accurate, but neither tells you who the man actually is. Lane was born Joseph Lane in Jersey City, New Jersey in 1956. His father was a truck driver and an aspiring tenor who died from alcoholism when Lane was 11 years old. His mother suffered from manic depression. He won a drama scholarship to St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, arrived with his brother, discovered the scholarship would not cover his expenses, and turned around and went home. He chose not to look for another option. He moved to New York instead and spent years taking whatever work he could find. When he tried to join Actors' Equity, the professional stage actors union, he discovered there was already a Joseph Lane registered. He renamed himself Nathan after the character Nathan Detroit from Guys and Dolls, which he would go on to perform on Broadway. That is either a beautiful coincidence or the kind of story a screenwriter invents and an editor cuts because it is too neat. His Broadway debut came in 1982 in a revival of Noel Coward's Present Laughter, alongside George C. Scott. His second Broadway show was Merlin, which starred the magician Doug Henning. Lane later said of that production, "Doug Henning's greatest magic trick was making the audience disappear." He has now appeared in more than 25 Broadway productions, 3 Tony Awards, 3 Drama Desk Awards. He was inducted into the American Theatre Hall of Fame in 2008. He won an Emmy in 2022 for Only Murders in the Building, ending a streak of 8 consecutive Emmy nominations in the Guest Actor category that had become something of a running joke in the industry, given that he kept losing despite giving performances that most of his competitors would have been proud to use as career highlights. He voiced Timon in The Lion King in 1994. He played Albert in The Birdcage alongside Robin Williams in 1996, a performance that drew his first Golden Globe nomination. He starred in The Producers on Broadway and then reprised the role in the film. He played Roy Cohn in Angels in America, a role of genuine political and moral weight that he handled with a precision that felt genuinely dangerous. He is currently starring in a new Broadway revival of Death of a Salesman, a non-traditional and more abstract and psychological interpretation, he told The View, which is what he was technically on the programme to discuss before the conversation took a different direction entirely. What this biography establishes is not simply a list of achievements. It establishes a particular relationship to the performing arts. Lane did not study film. He did not come up through auditions in Los Angeles or land a role in a franchise at 23 and build outward from there. He came up through the theatre, through live performance in rooms where there are no retakes, where the audience is 20 feet away and you can see their faces, where every night is the only time that specific sequence of moments will ever exist. The performing arts that Chalamet waved away as culturally irrelevant are for Lane the entire architecture of his professional life. He has spent 4 decades in buildings adjacent to opera houses and ballet studios. He knows what goes into them. There is a dimension to this controversy that most of the discourse has skipped past because the discourse prefers easy sides. What Chalamet actually said was not that ballet and opera are bad art forms. He was making a point, albeit one he executed catastrophically, about audience-driven demand versus institutional preservation. His argument was that he does not want to work in cinema the way some organisations work in classical performance, where the implicit message is that the art form requires rescue rather than appreciation. He was trying to make a distinction between genuine audience enthusiasm and managed relevance. The New York Times dance critic Gia Corliss actually defended him on exactly these grounds, noting that his point was about mainstream visibility rather than artistic merit. There is a version of that argument that a thoughtful person could make without stepping on a landmine. But Chalamet did not make that version. He made a careless, offhand version in front of cameras during awards season without apparently registering that his mother had given years of her life to the art form he was casually positioning as a cultural also-ran. And then he added all respect and a joke about 14 cents, which is the conversational equivalent of throwing a drink in someone's face and saying no offence. The all respect and the joke made it worse, not better, because they signalled that he understood he had said something uncomfortable and chose to glide past it rather than stop and mean what he was saying. This is where Nathan Lane's observation about unfunny people trying to be funny lands with the most force. There is a specific failure mode that afflicts very famous people in conversation. When they sense they have said something that might cause friction, they reach instinctively for levity. And because they are surrounded by people who find everything they say charming, they do not notice when the joke misses. Chalamet said, "I just lost 14 cents in viewership," as if the self-deprecation would function as an apology and a retraction simultaneously. It functioned as neither. The ballet and opera world's response, collectively, was more dignified and more commercially savvy than anyone perhaps expected. The Royal Ballet's statement that these art forms have continuously informed, inspired and elevated theatre, film, music and fashion, and that their influence runs through all of contemporary culture, was not defensive, it was simply accurate. Ballet technique sits at the foundation of a significant proportion of what gets performed on Broadway stages. Opera's dramatic structure informed musical theatre, which informed the kind of sung-through storytelling that fills the houses Lane spends his working life in. Chalamet's own career as a trained actor who attended the Fiorello H. LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts, the school depicted in Fame, is downstream of disciplines he characterised as irrelevant. The Los Angeles Opera apologised that it could not offer him complimentary tickets because its current run of Philip Glass's Akhenaten was nearly sold out. The Paris Opera posted a clip from their production of Nixon in China with a caption noting in French that ping pong also exists in opera. The Vienna State Opera took to the streets of Vienna and asked passers-by whether they cared about opera and filmed the results. The institution that Chalamet claimed nobody cared about responded to him with more creativity, more wit and more public engagement than most film marketing campaigns manage in their entire run. There is something worth naming here about the timing of all of this, which is the 2026 Academy Awards. Chalamet is nominated for Best Actor for Marty Supreme, in which he plays a hyper-competitive table tennis player named Marty Resnick. The film is an A24 production, which means it has the kind of cultural prestige that positions it as serious cinema, regardless of its subject matter. The comments were filmed on the 21st of February. They surfaced on social media on the 5th of March, Oscar voting closing day. Chalamet has said nothing publicly since the backlash began. His representatives have not issued a statement. He is attending the ceremony on the 15th of March, the same night that Misty Copeland, who made clear she felt his comments cut across the professional relationship she had believed she had with him, is performing in the Sinners tribute segment. Whether they encounter each other and what that looks like is something the evening will determine. What Nathan Lane did on The View was not simply a celebrity feud. Lane is 70 years old. He has been working in this industry since before Timothée Chalamet was born. He has spent decades fighting for gay rights in an industry that was not always welcoming. He came out publicly in 1999 following the murder of Matthew Shepard and has been a consistent fundraiser for Broadway Cares/Equity Fights AIDS ever since. He has played Roy Cohn, one of the most morally complex figures in American political history, and done it in a way that illuminated something real about power and self-destruction. He did not come to The View to perform outrage for clicks. He came to promote a new production of one of the most significant American plays ever written, and he found himself asked about something that touched something genuine in him. His line about Swan Lake and La Traviata outlasting dinner party conversations about who Timothée Chalamet was, that is not a burn. That is a historical argument. Verdi's La Traviata premiered in 1853. Swan Lake was first performed in 1877. Both are performed tonight, somewhere in the world, to sold-out houses, by artists who have trained since childhood with a rigour that very few professional athletes could match. The suggestion that these forms are in existential decline because a young film actor in the middle of his awards campaign reached for a careless metaphor is the kind of thing that is amusing for a news cycle and meaningless as a cultural statement. Lane knows this, not because he read it somewhere, but because he has spent his life inside the buildings where this work gets made. The question this whole episode keeps circling, without quite landing on, is who gets to define what culture matters? When a 30-year-old actor with a massive social media following and an Oscar nomination says an art form is no longer relevant, a certain portion of the internet treats that as a data point, as if fame confers authority over cultural value. When a 70-year-old Broadway veteran with 3 Tonys and 44 years of stage work responds, some of that same internet asks why he is punching at someone younger and less powerful. Both of those responses are wrong, and they are wrong in the same way. They are measuring the argument by the profile of the people making it, rather than by the argument itself. The argument itself, stripped of all the noise, is this: art forms with centuries of unbroken development, which require extraordinary physical and vocal discipline, which have directly shaped every entertainment medium that followed them, are not kept alive by institutional pleading. They are kept alive by the people who dedicate their lives to them and the audiences who keep showing up. The Metropolitan Opera's most recent production sold out. Opera North moved 45,000 tickets in a single season. The Coke Theatre at Lincoln Center, the building where Chalamet grew up dreaming big, in his own words, is currently home to the New York City Ballet's spring season. No one is keeping those institutions alive against the public's wishes. The public is funding them with its own money and its own time. The narrative of desperate survival is largely a media invention, and Chalamet walked straight into it, gave it a famous name to attach itself to, and is now watching it run. Lane's final shot at McConaughey, that some cannabis was likely involved and that this was tragic evidence of unfunny people attempting comedy, is doing something clever that most of the coverage missed. He is not just insulting them, he is identifying the specific error. The error was not having an opinion about culture. The error was confusing an unguarded, half-formed observation with a genuine performance, and then adding a joke to deflect from the mess. Lane has spent 50 years performing. He knows the difference between a thought fully formed and a thought that slipped out in front of cameras. He also knows, from hard experience, that the performing arts do not owe anyone a rescue narrative. They will be standing long after the promotional cycles of individual films have concluded. The thing about this whole episode that will linger after the awards ceremony, after the news cycle moves on, after everyone has forgotten which film won Best Picture, is what it revealed about a very specific cultural reflex. The reflex that treats popularity as a measure of worth. The reflex that assumes whatever currently dominates streaming metrics or awards conversations represents the high watermark of human creative achievement. Ballet has been technically and artistically developing for 500 years, opera for 400. Film, as a medium, is about 130 years old. Chalamet has been making films for roughly 12 years. Nathan Lane has been performing on stages for over 40. And yet, there is a version of this story in which the older form and the older artist are positioned as the ones who need to justify their relevance. Lane sat down on that sofa and refused to play that game. He said, clearly, and without apparent concern for what Chalamet's publicist might make of it, that the art form that has stood for 5 centuries will outlast the conversation we are currently having. He is right. He has always been right. And the reason it landed the way it did, the reason the clip circulated, the reason audiences applauded, is that people understood, on some level they could not quite articulate, that someone was finally saying what is plainly true. Popularity is not permanence. Fame is not legacy. And the show business circle of life, as Lane put it, has a rotation that does not pause for anyone's press tour. Swan Lake is performing somewhere tonight. It will perform somewhere tomorrow night. And 50 years from now, long after any of us can remember what Marty Supreme was about, it will still be performing. That is not a challenge to cinema or to Chalamet or to the film industry's legitimacy. That is simply what happens when art is built to last. Nathan Lane understood that before he walked through the door. He just happened to be in the right place at the right moment to say it out loud.